All right, the legend Cameron Crowe is here. He's got Almost Famous, one of my favorite movies of all time, premiering on Broadway on November 3rd. And we're going to talk about Almost Famous. You don't have to twist my arm to do that. I want to go backwards, though, because August was 40 years since Fast Times. And I was thinking about doing it as rewatchables, and I still am. And I rewatched it, and I was like, God damn, what was the movie before Fast Times that was like Fast Times? Was there one?
Over the Edge was really good, Bill. Did you ever see that with Matt Dillon? And
yeah.
I guess, it was just kind of like loose and rock, and you had like Van Halen music and Cheap Trick music in it. It was kind of edgy and Spetters. There was a movie from Denmark that was kind of like a raw youth movie. But Amy Heckerling was like ready to go there with Fast Times. And that was kind of new, tone-wise and stuff.
Well, so you write a book in 81, I think, where you spend a year at a school in the San Diego area. And you go undercover because you've been writing for Rolling Stone for a while at that point. And I don't know if this would be allowed to happen anymore, would it? What would happen if you did that book now?
You'd get arrested. It was so loose, and it was a public school, and I had gone to a Catholic high school, and my mom had skipped me all these grades. So it was, I was a youthful 21 to 22, and it was kind of like the public school senior year that I also got to have, which was fun to write about and exist in. But no, it wouldn't happen like that now. It would be, you'd be done on the first ask.
And you're going in there almost like you have your magazine reporter, Rolling Stone brain on, and you're just soaking everything in. You're soaking in anecdotes, characters, pieces of
Big
people.
time.
What else are you doing?
I was mourning the loss of a girlfriend who had dumped me. So I was kind of like, I was the sad reporter guy that just got to like live through all of these other kids, characters, lives, and they were great characters. They were so different from kind of the rock stars that I'd been lucky enough to write about for Rolling Stone. But it was really cool to kind of just be writing about somebody that didn't have a commercial stake in what you were writing about. You just were kind of writing a living novel, really, which is what it ended up feeling like.
Yeah, it's funny. You go back and critically, I think it was more positive than negative, but it was a little mixed. And now there's been this revisionist history that it was belatedly, it became a thing. I was in 8th grade when that movie came out. That movie was a thing. I mean, everybody saw it. There was nothing like it. Just having two females as the lead characters basically was pretty unusual for back then. The way the movie talked about sex and wasn't judgmental about it, but it's just, Jennifer Jason Leigh's character just going through this journey, trying to figure out who she is, and she's going to make mistakes, and it's clumsy, and that's what high school is. And I think that's why it resonated like it did.
It's so great that you caught on to it early and stuff. I think, Bill, the making of the movie, we were racked with this idea that maybe it was never going to come out, that somebody just put it on the books and it was being made and nobody was ever going to do anything with it. And that helped it, because we felt like all the jokes, I felt like, you have Debbie Harry, you have a joke about Debbie Harry and like how to be cool. They're not going to put this out,
Yeah.
Because we were making it on the studio lot at the same time they were doing Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. And it was so Burt Reynolds, and Entourage was rolling around. And we were kind of like, well, that's a real movie. I don't know what we are. And Amy had that same kind of like take no prisoners vibe too. It was like, whatever happens, I'm going to put actors in that are fun for me. And our kind of union of her New York sensibility and my California thing made it aired out the sentimentality in a really good way. She rocked it.
Yeah, because you think like we're at the 40-year mark and all the things that have hit with 25 and under people, and especially like 20 and under people, right? Where it's happening now with Euphoria.
Yeah,
everybody watches Euphoria,
totally.
But such an easier way to watch Euphoria because you just need to know somebody with HBO or HBO Max. Back then, if you didn't go to the movie, then it was like the early days of VHS. There was like some HBO and some cable things, but for the most part, it was like, oh, this my friend has a copy of Fast Times. Whoa, we got to go over there.
Yeah.
It was that whole era, you know?
Yeah, it was almost an X movie. In fact, it was rated X for a while.
What?
So it always had this clandestine kind of feel about it. Yeah, it was. Amy had like frontal nudity on Damone in the sex scene, and was really kind of like ready to fight for it to stay in there. And in the end, we were convinced to trim it so it barely got an R. And Roger Ebert reviewed it, and
he didn't like it that much.
Review. He didn't like it, and Bill, he thought that we had like kidnapped Jennifer Jason Leigh and forced her to do this stuff. And what was amazing was Jennifer Jason Leigh was the most outspoken like cast member that was like, keep it X, leave that nudity in, man, let's go there. So eventually, like Roger Ebert kind of, you know, aired out his problems and kind of came to appreciate it, and was definitely a huge force in getting Say Anything released in any real way.
Yeah, it's an unbelievable treasure from that decade. And there's some high school films that I just feel like just nail whatever the specific year was. Like Breakfast Club was like that too, where it's just like, it just kind of nails whatever 1985 was. You can kind of get it from that movie. But the Sean Penn piece, which I think has gotten lost over the years because he became Sean Penn. He won 2 Oscars. He became an A+ lister. But he had that and he had Bad Boys in the same year. And Bad Boys was an important movie for him too. And it was really important for people like me who was like, Spicoli was instantly iconic. But then he's this Bad Boys guy too. He's in juvie. He's got to fight S.I. Morales. He's got to fight to the death at the end. And between those two, it was like, that's the guy I'm buying all the stock in for the next 10 years. He was like the LeBron, right?
Totally. And I remember his earliest nickname was Sean De Niro. And he's basically, Bad Boys hadn't come out. So it was just all under the fuel of what he was putting out. Like, just not letting anybody talk to him as anything other than Jeff. And, you know, quietly kind of in love with Pam Springsteen, Bruce's sister, who played, you know, a character in Fast Times, but couldn't approach her because he was supposed to be an outcast.
Yeah.
So I think the minute the movie wrapped, he was like, hello, Pam, Sean Penn, let's go out. But he was completely strict about that, like the whole time we were filming. And Nick Cage was there too, playing a tiny part as Nick Coppola.
Yeah, Nick Coppola.
Which was wild.
The one other thing that stood out rewatching it was the music. And, you know, you didn't direct that movie, but music has been such an essential piece of the movies you make, dating back to your Rolling Stone days, which I want to talk about in a second. But It's this weird era, right?
Yeah.
It's not classic rock because I feel like that mid 70s stretch. Yeah. That late 60s, early 70s is its own era. But then like 78 to 81 or maybe 79 to 81 is something else. And some of the songs that are in there, it's like Jackson Browne, The Cars. Yeah. There's late Led Zeppelin there. But I don't know what that era is. Blondie's in there. I don't know what it is, and it's never been named. Like yacht rock ended up becoming an era belatedly. Yeah. But I don't know what that era was.
But what is it? Because it's kind of like, remember the Romantics, What I Like About You and stuff. So it had, and the Cars even, there was like a skinny tie kind of early alt-rocky thing. But then there was also
little
punk around 77.
Yeah.
So there's Elvis Costello coming up. There's Rockpile. There's Cheap Trick. So it's like pop is morphing and punk is floating around in there. And Led Zeppelin was still king.
Well, and there was like Jesse's Girl. There was those kind of songs too. It's almost like, maybe it's like the 8-track era, because what were the 8-tracks were there for like 3 years. I don't know, but it's something. But I hear the Moving in Stereo. I'm like, that's just like a classic 1981 song. That song makes no sense 4 years later or 4 years earlier. Like it has to be that level.
It's right in that pocket. It's so true.
Going backwards, you were writing for Rolling Stone when you were a kid, and a lot of those features, Rolling Stone's website, which is improved. Now they've released some of this stuff in books, but some of the features from the 70s are just, there's 2 things that are like snapshots of the musicians and the great artists and the great bands from there, right? You have these Rolling Stone features where if you were like blessed with the Rolling Stone feature, which is like one of the big pots of most famous. And then there was the Saturday Night Live appearance, And those were really the two things other than somebody passing through town. But, you know, like you look at somebody like Bob Seger where they had the Rolling Stone feature about him, but it wasn't a cover. And then I think it was like 1980. It's like, all right, he's cover worthy. It's time for Bob Seger. And it was like this crucial Bob Seger moment. But you came out of that and it was like when you spent time with these bands or an artist or whatever, you had one chance to capture them. Nobody else was really doing it. You weren't really competing against anybody. You had Cream, but
It's
Cream
true.
was a little more underground. Like you weren't competing against anybody. So what was like the almost the burden of having to go in and being like, this is it, man. Somebody's got to capture these guys. I got to do it or it's never happening.
Well, you hit it right on the head when you say like that was a little bit of a holy grail for a band to get on the cover. And if a band was floating below and you were covering them and they knew that they might have a shot at the cover, that was the thing. Because they'd always be kind of auditioning, like, you know, does Ben Fong Torres know that we've got these outfits that would be really freaking amazing, man? You know, and you'd be like, I just don't think they're not ready to anoint you yet. You know, well, then why are we doing this piece at all? Okay, we're still going to do it, but when are we going to be on? So there's a whole thing about that. And the only thing above that I remember was every once in a while, Time magazine would put a musician on the cover. So rarely. And that was also thought to be a curse. So like, you know, Paul Simon, they might put on the cover of Time magazine, but like maybe it was unlucky. So Rolling Stone was like the safe, they anoint you kind of thing. And sometimes you'd be on the road and the band or covering the band and the band would pop and you get that call from Jan or Ben Fong Torres saying it's a cover. And I remember like telling people like, you know, the Allman Brothers band, it's going to be a cover, you know, and they just sit up a little straighter and start, you know, vetting their interviews a little bit more because they know a lot of people are going to be reading it. But it was such a fun ride to kind of be in that era when rock and that whole part of culture was a little more private. Led Zeppelin, people never remember, Led Zeppelin never took a concert ad out in their entire history. It was all word of mouth. Somebody in a box office hears that the tickets are going to be available for a show like in June. They tell somebody and it spreads and it sells out without an ad. So what you do is you then have an arena filled with people who are essentially looking at each other like, we get it. We're here because we knew. And that fed into the experience of the show, which you don't get now.
No, you know, I mean, obviously music's so different for so many different reasons, but it really did matter when somebody came to your town for a long, long time. And I think YouTube really hurt. Now social media, now it's like, whatever. I can see any band I want. I can watch, you know, hundreds of performances. Like Pearl Jam, it was this in the 90s, this incredible experience to have them come to your town. There were bootleg CDs. It's like, oh my God, there's a Pearl Jam live concert from Amsterdam. It's not great quality, and now there's like, you can like, it's kind of gone the other way. It's like so accessible. That's like the new special. Back then it was like, I didn't really know anything about anybody I liked. You know, it's like, it was a Rolling Stone feature. It was seeing them in person, or if they went on a late night show, which really wasn't even happening until Letterman. Right? Yeah. Like Dire Straits wasn't going on like the Johnny Carson show, but no. Letterman, they had a chance to go on, right? So there was way more mystery, which I feel like those features, pockets. That's what made them so important.
You read my mind talking about Pearl Jam because I was thinking about how Eddie Vedder tries to kind of protect the fan experience with that cool thing, which I think he still does, where he'll keep track of what they played when they were in your town.
Oh, yeah. So he's psychotic about it.
Yeah, it's fantastic, though. So he's got an imaginary, not imaginary person who's been to every show in that town, and he builds a set over here that works with what they did when they first came to your town. And like, I'll take that as a fan experience. That's cool. That's private in that way.
I thought of Eddie when you told that Time magazine, when you mentioned that Time magazine tidbit, because when they were on the cover when Pearl Jam was on the cover of Time, it sent Eddie into a tailspin. I actually think it determined some of their album choices and the direction he took the band in the mid 90s. Cause he was like, I never wanted this. This was not supposed to happen.
Absolutely true. And I remember when that was bubbling up and it was no bueno, like keep us off. Hilarious.
With that Rolling Stone, all these bands you covered, and now it's been, Jesus. I mean, I barely remember what I did 3 years ago. I'm sure a lot of the stuff blurs together for you, but like, what was the seminal band? What was the one, like, if you're at dinner with somebody and they're like, just give us your number one, I can't believe I'm hanging out with this band. Which band was it?
I have a really good memory for so much of that. It really like seared itself largely because I was a fan.
Yeah.
But also felt like I was representing the people who wanted a front row seat like I would have dreamed of having. So I was like, okay, I'm representing those people behind me in this show. And also I need to ask the tough questions of the people that are right in front of me. So that was a really kind of remarkable place to sit and all that. So Led Zeppelin was huge. There was somebody out in front of the theater the other day that said, like, tell us a Led Zeppelin story. And I was there for 20 minutes. You know, it was just like, I can't help it sometimes. Joni Mitchell was an interview that I had wanted since I was 15, and she didn't do interviews. And there came the Mingus album, where I think she felt it was time to explain the context for this jazz experiment with Charles Mingus. And she was also up to doing an interview like you are so good at, which is like a career retrospective from a deep tissue point of view. She was like, I'm ready for the big interview. And that was amazing, Bill. That was like somebody who speaks in third draft kind of paragraphs, telling you everything that you had never heard from her life. And that was amazing.
Wow.
But little things I'll discover. Like I discovered an interview that Jerry Garcia gave me the other day, like one summer when I was just starting to write for Rolling Stone. And the interview is fantastic. And he kind of predicts so much of what was going to happen with the commercialization of rock and how the Grateful Dead needed to figure out how to monetize what they were going to do without compromising or corrupting their thing. It was brilliant. And I'm like, man, I was just a kid with a tape recorder rolling in, and he didn't have to go to those places, but he did, because maybe it was just the look in my eyes that I actually did listen to the music, you know? And so many of those guys really were reporters whose job was like sports or, you know, local stuff. And if they caught you backstage, you were going to get just like a run of the mill interrogation type interview. But I was ready to stick around and ask him anything.
And there was no self-awareness at that point. You don't have the ecosystem that we have now where the wrong quote, the wrong sentence can start a 3-day news cycle and have everybody coming after you. Like the same thing was in sports. Like
really true.
Sports had the glory days of sports features was the 70s and the early 80s. The best sports book ever written was Breaks of the Game, which came out, I think, in 1981 or 1982, but was about the 79-80 Portland Trailblazers season. And he just was embedded with that team for a year, like really embedded. There was no,
the best.
I have to deal with agent, entourage. He's just there. He's on the plane. David Halberstam, the great one. He's on the plane. He's in the locker room. He's at lunch. He's going to dinner after the games. And that was a little like how it worked with you. Like when you were going to go hang out with the band, like you actually hung out with the band. It wasn't like, here's your 2 hours with Harry Styles. You were like, no, you're going on Harry Styles' plane. You're going to eat with him. You're hanging out with this hotel room at 3 a.m. You're going to potentially watch him do whatever the hell he does and maybe not put that in the article. But you kind of had to decide, you're the gatekeeper of, should I put this in? Which is a little what Almost Famous is about. But man, I miss that era. It's so fascinating to read that stuff again.
Me too. Sometimes you get it with the documentary, sometimes, but not always. But I love the embedded stuff. There was a writer at Rolling Stone named Grover Lewis, who I heard the legend was that he had written himself out, that he had gotten so deep into it and written so many of these like really inside profiles that being in the same room with a typewriter freaked him out. He had nothing left. But he would live with Paul Newman for 3 months or be with Sam Peckinpah in Mexico and just like drink and rage and argue. And these would be these profiles in Rolling Stone from movie sets. That was cool.
Right. Well, and there was 2 versions of them, right? And there's this one, the other kind of version really took off in the 80s, but it was almost like a long short story that was nonfiction. But the writer really went for it. And a lot of it was about somebody really writing and really kind of going up. But then there's kind you did where it was like I hung out with this band or this artist for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And here's what they're like. And here's the point. You're almost like staying out of the way of your own story a little bit. You're just like, here's a snapshot of what's going on with this person or this band right now.
Yeah.
And I personally like those more. And I just wish there were more of those and less of the other ones.
The Who would let a reporter do that, a writer do that. Because Pete Townsend is probably the best rock journalist. If you read any of his stuff, where he'll do accounts of being in the Who, it's fantastic. It's raw, warts and all, aching, savaging himself. It's beautiful. So when he would let a reporter come on the road with the Who, he would let him see all that stuff. Be in the locker room, be in that dressing room when we're actually hitting each other. And then we wait to calm down before we bring DJs in to like be nice to DJs. You stay in the room for that. It's like, it's the best.
And you logged some time with the Eagles too. I mean, there's some out of the DNA for Stillwater. What is there's some Eagles, there's some Allman Brothers, Little Led Zepp. Who else is in there?
Skynyrd. Some Skynyrd. We get Ronnie Van Zant fans coming to the show, and I love talking with them. Simple Man of Leonard Skinner's song "Simple Man" is in the play, and they're just really, hey man, you put Simple Man in the play. Good for you. Let's talk about Ronnie. And the truth is, Ronnie was one of the very biggest losses, like Chris Cornell, where the guy was so vivid that I still have a hard time talking about Van Zant in the past tense. I can't imagine that light being put out. And I mean, his widow, Judy Van Zant, like, I don't know, 15 years after, 20 years maybe after the plane crash, I had lunch with her and she said, we're thinking about doing some projects about Ronnie and the band. And I said, I still can't listen to the music. I'm having such a hard time with it because I felt so much for this guy who befriended me as a kid and amazing guy. She said, you got to get over it, man. I was married to him. You have to get over it. And that was really poignant and powerful, but it's also what it is to be a fan. When you hold it so closely. That guy, Ronnie, was very candid with me and was coming up around the time of the Allman Brothers. They were like the little brothers of the Allman Brothers. Greg was not particularly friendly with Ronnie, and I had written about the Allman Brothers. So Ronnie would talk about, I feel less than around this guy. Like, how do I act? Just amazing stuff to hear from somebody who's a hero to you, making you an equal. So there's a little bit of Ronnie in Almost Famous, the movie and the play, and rightly so. Big loss.
And the Eagles. So one of my favorite documentaries ever, the part 1 about them. Amazing. And it dives into their creative process. So many good things. And the one thing they don't go all the way into is the Fry Henley stuff and how it starts out as Fry's band and then it flips and it becomes Henley's band, which I always felt like you must have like borrowed at least just a whiff of that for Almost Famous, right? Where it's like, this is the Jeff Beebe band. No, it's actually becoming the Russell Hammond band. Sorry, Jeff Beebe, you're getting left behind. But I always felt that was Glenn Fry, right?
Big time. Yes, absolutely. Because it's two guys that had bands that were significant in their town, in their hometown, so those guys have very specific personalities, and so they combine their power, and that you get all the sparks from it, and you in either direction, So this was one of those things, Bill, that you don't get now. They asked me to come live with them when they were doing the One of These Nights.
Wow!
And
what a time to live with them too.
Tape. I have the cassette of them writing Lion Eyes together. And it's all there on that tape. You just see like they just meld, man, and they know their influences. They have the same experience in a place called Tana's just down the hill from where they were living. So Lion Eyes was about women they had just been around. So they were aching about it and longing and also just wanting to like write a song that just had a killer song power element to it. And that was their thing. It's like, we got to put away all of our stuff, particularly Fry. we got to put away all of our petty shit, because like it's about the song. I mean, Glenn had a shirt that said "Song Power," and that was also that was not a joke. He was about the song. So they bowed down to the songs, but there was a lot of stuff that went into getting to the moment where you're ready to write it and record it. And that was cool being around them for that.
Do you feel like all bands have to have a moment where it either keeps going or they break up at some point during the run? Because even like Pearl Jam had it. You dipped into it when you did your Pearl Jam documentary. Like you too had it. I can't think of a band that didn't have it, but they usually break up. It's usually too much and they have to at least get away from each other. Maybe they'll come back, but they usually break up.
Great question. And great observation. And true. Like any band that's in it for the right reasons, who've spent that time together, they come to that cliff. And sometimes, they jump off. Here was a theory. Tell me what you think of this theory. There was a theory that English bands stay together and American bands break up in that key moment. Is that true? Let's think about it.
Would that be because Americans are more narcissistic?
Answer number one. Ding, 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 ding.
I always thought one of my things is like cocaine and drugs seems to be not helping a lot of these things, and the bands that maybe weren't as involved in that stuff probably had a better chance. Like the Eagles, like they even talk about it in the documentary. They're like, there was drugs and girls everywhere, and we definitely partook.
Yeah.
And cocaine, as we know now, it's going to make you paranoid. It's going to mess you up long term. You think it's great short term, long term it's horrific. Now we know.
Horrific.
But nobody knew from like 76 to 83.
No, and before that was kind of the weed, the pot phase, which
acid and mush. Oh yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah, but it wasn't as life threatening or as corrosive in that way, or it didn't. It was more music forward as a drug, whereas cocaine is like, wait a minute, that thing known as your instinct, you don't have to have one instinct. You can have 500 instincts all at once. Try mixing that record now. And that's why you get these bands who are like, 5 years in the studio to make 10 songs. Whereas, writing about Joni Mitchell, for example, you look at her sessionography, she records, 4 huge songs that today, Big Yellow Taxi, River, like just a blizzard of songs all in one day. And you ask her, like, how did you do that? She's like a plumber, I just go in and do it. That's a job I do. I write the song and I get it recorded. Whereas the odyssey of how in a cocaine blizzard you're going to manage to capture your possible masterpiece, it's like,
good luck.
You're almost over, before you begin.
It's crazy you have that Lying Eyes recording because, I mean, that I know you saw the Beatles Get Back doc, but that some of the stuff with Lennon and McCartney and that, I think one of the just incredible things to that doc was just not knowing this stuff existed for 50 plus years. It's like, this is everything I ever wanted from a documentary. Why did you hold this out on us and with the best two guys?
Yeah. Yeah. Playing some of the stuff solo, offhanded, and it's gorgeously filmed. And it feels like a miracle,
It was hard not to think of Almost Famous and Stillwater, even watching the Beatles, because it was like not the movie version of it, where it's just everything was passive aggressive and Harrison just getting disappointed. And then the next day it'd be like, yeah, George isn't coming today. Whereas if you're doing the movie version of that, you need the Stillwater t-shirts and you need them to have the screaming match and you need Russell to go to the party. Like in real life, it was just like George's feelings are hurt. He's not coming in tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny. Like, I think that's why a lot of the fictionalized versions of a rock story, they try so hard to not fall into tropes that it becomes one big trope. When in fact, the life of a band has many of those moments. So it's just whatever that mix is that makes you feel like it feels to be in a band and be in that kind of submarine together for years. The things that happen in the submarine of a band's life are often like completely ridiculous. And then out of the blue, super resonant and amazing.
Yeah, like The Last Dance with Jordan, that documentary about that last season, even though it's sports, not music, it still felt like it could have been a music band, right? It's this band that's at the precipice of breaking up. They've all been together too long. There's a lot of bitterness. There's resentment for who's number one, number. It was all the same shit that we've seen break up our favorite bands.
Great comparison. It was like a band film, and honest. It felt real honest. You know, you know what it felt like? It felt like it put you in the room. It put you in the room with them, and that's always the dream. To if you have the opportunity to be in the room and actually interviewing somebody or be reporting on them, you just got to be aware of the details and get the details that only life can bring you, and get your details right, and just, you know, be a one-person documentarian, and give people the feeling of what it was like to be in the room. Because Almost Famous, the movie, the goal was to give people the feeling of being inside a musical elixir where music meant a little bit more. And these people were all fans living for that feeling of being transported by a song or a band that you love. So, like, can the movie make you feel that way? And the miracle kind of Almost Famous, which was like a 4.5 hour first cut. I remember showing it to my mom and saying, "What is this? Ah!" And she said, "Well, it's too long, but there's a masterpiece in there. So get to work." And, you know, you can debate whether it's a masterpiece, but it did reduce to having the feeling that ultimately, you know, we thought we'd try and see if we could get it in a live theater situation. But the goal was always to be a noble fan and to use the opportunity to make a movie about that.
Well, I want to talk about Almost Famous, obviously. Let's go to Singles, just because I think Singles, for better or worse, sets up Almost Famous, right? We
can talk about anything, Bill.
Well,
We're on the ride, baby.
You have this idea. First of all, you're in Seattle. We just did this for Rewatchables, so I'm totally versed. I'm ready.
Okay, let's go.
You're in the scene. You have this idea. It's right around the same time as we have like Melrose Place season 1 with the characters in the apartment building. We have real world 7 cast members thrown together. And you're fascinated by this early 90s people being thrown together where they become family, even though they may not even have that much in common, but all of a sudden that becomes your family. But at the same time, there's this incredible music scene happening, and you capture it, and you have the movie, and they don't release it. And it just sits for months and months and months. And by the time it finally comes out, it's September 92, and it's late, but it's still cool. And now as the years pass, you captured it. But in the moment, if it's 10, 11 months earlier, it's completely different. Like, that would drive me crazy. I would never get over that.
You're absolutely right. But the thing is, the scene that you just mentioned was kind of a joke at the time. Like, there was no Seattle scene. There was just some bands and a great radio station called KCMU. And they were all having, you know, they took jobs in coffee houses and stuff to be able to support their bands. But there was no scene like LA. Like, I had come from Los Angeles, and it felt not unlike San Diego. There's no real scene. There's just some bands from here. So the whole kind of inside joke of the Singles, the Seattle that we filmed when we filmed it, this was like a joke to say, you know, we're a band in the Seattle scene. The weirdest thing was that the music was so good, Soundgarden in particular, Alice in Chains, that it did explode. And I always thought if any of those bands exploded, it was going to be Soundgarden, because I had been to a Soundgarden show that was like a Black Sabbath combined with like a psychedelic thing combined with like Cheap Trick, you know, or something, or Led Zeppelin, Houses of the Holy. And I just thought, like, this is so much better than the hard rock bands in LA, that I wanted to do a movie that had that soundtrack to it. And all the bands, all the bands participated. A lot of them worked on the movie as, you know, PAs, or Jeff Ament was in the art department. And it just felt like a group effort that all of a sudden, you know, that the roving spotlight of like media sensation came and landed on that city after we'd filmed it. So it was actually the spotlight that got it filmed. Warner Brothers was just kind of pissed off that it wasn't what Harry Met Sally. That was what they thought a romantic comedy should be. And they're like, you're giving us Matt Dillon with long hair. That's not Billy Crystal, man.
Well, as you're filming it, Nevermind comes out, becomes a comet. And then Pearl Jam, the 10 comes out a few months after that. Same thing. Yeah. But when you started filming it, when you did, I remember in the research, you'd gotten the cast together and you went to see a show, and it was like you went to see Mookie Blaylock. They weren't even Pearl Jam yet. So you're filming it and the scene hasn't even taken off. Like I just thought the timing of that was unbelievable. And then by the time it comes out, the scene's happened.
Yeah, it's bizarre. I remember Matt Dillon came late to that show. It was Alice in Chains, Mookie Blaylock, and I think Kristen Berry opening. But Matt Dillon had shown up from, pre-wig, of course, from New York. And I remember him sitting there going, I'm into jazz, man. I'm just into jazz. This sounds good, but like I'm into jazz. And they all kind of were, the cast was looking at me like, okay, so this is like this loud thing that you really love. Okay, well, I'm going to go to bed early, but they started to catch a buzz. What it was a really welcoming community of musicians, and they lacked, pretension in any degree. And Eddie was just the shyest guy. He could barely look up from this wall of hair.
Yeah.
And Stone and Jeff were kind of a little bit the ambassadors of that scene. It was tiny and beautiful, and it became huge and scary, and now it's huge and beautiful again. I think that band really has a wonderful dynamic now. But for that time, it was scary to put the movie out because, the media was kind of making a caricature, as Mudhoney would tell you, out of their city. So when Warner Brothers wanted to do a TV show of Singles, that I immediately was like, no, I don't want to be a part of that. And that became Friends, which is a whole other thing.
I can't wait to talk to you about that. Wait, on the Seattle thing, you have Lane, you have Cornell, you have Eddie, and you have Cobain. And they're all there at the same. But I mean, those four as just stage performers, as to see those four people live, and you capture some of it in Singles. I mean, like Lane's thing in Singles is out of control. It's so like I could have watched that for like an hour.
Me too.
But I think that's so unusual and so unique. And New York had a little bit of this in the early 2000s when they had the Yeah Yeah Yeahs and the Strokes and a couple others, but it wasn't like this. Yeah. I mean, I just don't think it'll ever happen again.
It comes from those artists, they really, they were channeling something. And like I say, Cornell was the most down to earth person. And that's why it's so heartbreaking, because he was among the most generous people you'd meet, particularly in the world of musicians who often are very self-obsessed and rightly so and stuff. But Cornell was a really open-hearted guy who supported so many of those bands just with pure fandom. And Smashing Pumpkins are on that soundtrack because of Chris. Chris was like, I was in Chicago. We played a show with this band. You really should check this band out. They should be part of your movie. He's that kind of guy.
Well, the soundtrack became an all-timer. Like it's all time. It really is. It's like, thanks, Bill. Whatever the conversation is, it has to be mentioned. It was interesting doing the research though, where it didn't seem like you felt like you would kind of, I know it's like tough to talk about casting stuff, but it didn't seem like if you had a do-over on a couple things, you probably would have. Yeah. And especially like the lead character, probably a little too old, because I was supposed to be the exact same age as this guy who's in the movie who falls in love with Kira, with Kira Sidgwick's character. But he seemed like he was 5 years older than me, right? And Matt Dillon, even though I think he's good in Singles, he's Matt Dillon. Yeah. But there's always this Matt Dillon piece to him. But it's just like, did you ever think if I had to do this over again, I'm going more no names, or I'm rolling the dice
Big
versus
time,
like
big time. Well, we needed somebody to kind of get the financing, which is often a trap,
Yeah.
but sometimes it all works out. Like Jerry Maguire doesn't get made with an unknown, for example.
Well,
I
that's
can't
different.
Picture anybody but Tom Cruise in there. So like
that
that's
needs to be Cruise.
the perfect marriage, right? It was originally written for Hanks, but even the Hanks version of Jerry Maguire.
You wrote that for Hanks?
Yes, and he was the first guy to get the script, and
I think I knew this.
He was admiring, but passed. In fact, the most seductive pass you've ever heard. I didn't realize he passed until I hung up. That's how presidential he is. But I'll tell you, Bill, exactly who I originally had gone to, with no offense to anybody who was cast in singles, but I went first to Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
I wanted young Johnny Depp. I felt it was perfect. And I really tried to talk him into it. But in the end, and this happened to me a couple of times, happened with Johnny Depp, it happened with Leonardo DiCaprio, where it comes down to a moment where they say, I don't want to do a romantic story. I don't want to say I love you and do a whole thing about I love you, I love you. And I'd be like, nah, that's not the kind of romance I'm interested in. Think of Billy Wilder. Think of think of the tough aspects of love and think about a real I love you in a movie and what that can mean. They're like, no. No, I don't want to chase around, a romantic relationship for the course of a movie. And sometimes they would openly say to me, I'd rather play somebody with a gun. I just would. And so that at that point, I'm unable to cast them because they're not on board. Campbell Scott really was game to do all that stuff. I saw him playing Hamlet at the Old Globe Theater, and I thought he was wonderful. And you try and put the pieces together. He had to get a haircut right before we were filming Singles
because he was doing Dying Young, right? Yeah,
yeah. He got a haircut that was a little too short. I mean, now, of course, it's okay. We should have just like dyed his hair like platinum blonde or something. I don't know, but that length of hair would be okay now. But at the time, it felt like a little out of kilter with the look of that guy who is an in-between guy between the scenes. He felt a little bit more of a business guy. So, you try and make it work and everything. We actually did a couple takes with a wig at one point, and it's just a wig is a wig. And we were just like, yeah, let's do it. Let's just do it the way you are, and let's do it. And let's let it rip. And he and Kira Sedgwick had a very great relationship, and so hopefully there's some truth in there, but it doesn't play like a documentary, and that's okay.
Well, you wrote a diary thing, like your diaries for making the movie, and it has some good behind the scenes stuff with you and Campbell Scott. I always thought my dream guy for that role would have been River Phoenix, and I don't know what kind of state of mind he was at that. Like I know he was starting to have some issues at that point, but the straight version of River Phoenix's career, if he doesn't get sidetracked by stuff, that would have been there. So
incredible. And for all we know, Campbell at the time was kind of developing what his style was going to be. So he could have tilted more to the River Phoenix of it all. Right. But he has a very kind of a noble stature about his work. He's really a great actor and great director. And, we spent that time together. We lived through it. And sometimes it's perfect and sometimes it becomes perfect. And sometimes it doesn't.
I mean, the casting, like Jerry Maguire, it's like it has to be those two people.
It has to be.
That's the other example of that, right? You just go 2 for 2, and then you throw out a script and you shoot it well, and now you have an iconic movie.
Yeah.
Wait,
you can't grasp how it's going to work, though. I mean, Renee Zellweger had come in twice, and the last time she came in for Jerry Maguire, her dog had died, and she was not in the right frame of mind, and she left for the audition, and none of us even talked about it. It was that moment in a room where you just don't even bring it up. It obviously wasn't going to work. And then, I don't know, 6 months go by or whatever, and Gail Levin, our casting director, really super good friend of mine, says, I can't get that girl from Texas with the dog out of my mind. Can I bring her back? I think she's probably not right for you, probably not right for this story. Can I bring her back? And we're like, yeah, let's bring her back. She was a sweetheart, And so she came back on a day when I think Mira Sorvino and Gwyneth Paltrow and a couple of other people I think were around.
Probably Joey Lauren Adams is in there too. I'm trying to think of like mid-90s actors.
I think so. Actually. I think you're right. And Cruz was there to read with them. And something happened. Renee walked into the room and she made him laugh. And she just came in with all that young spirit. And there's a moment, I think I was even filming it, where Cruz turns around and he looks at me and he looks at her and he looks back at me like, wow.
Come on. Yeah, come on. What
like
are we doing here?
Yeah, but it was also like a human in the world saying, isn't she something? And that was the character. And so that was like, Renee. We love Renee. She still had to do a screen test to get it. But that moment galvanized the fact that we could do an unknown against Tom Cruise, the ultimate known. And that would be Jerry Maguire. But we didn't know until that day.
I said you nailed the two, but I shortchanged Rod Tidwell, who is probably one of my top 4 favorite sports movie characters of all time. And the whole Tidwell family. And it's was just so unlike anything. The sports movie versus the rom-com thing with Jerry Maguire. I think I litigated this once. I can't even remember where I landed. It's both, which I think it's why it's one of the great date movies that's probably ever happened. But Cuba Gooding is as Rod Tidwell too. Like 3 for 3. Wait, we got to go backwards.
Okay.
So they want you to do. They want you to do singles. No, they want you to do singles. I didn't realize this until we did the singles pod. They want you to do singles as a TV show. You're like, no way.
Yeah.
Maybe a year and a half later, mysteriously, there's a show called Friends, same production company, and you could have been even tangentially involved. Like, just put my name in there as an EP and send me some checks. But you're like, no, I don't want that. I'm a movie guy. And your mom still makes fun of you. Or your mom made fun of you for years about that decision.
I think, yeah, she's still making fun of me. I actually think I had a thought bubble with Mark Arm from Mudhoney's face, hanging right here when they were talking to me about making it into a TV show. I just had this idea that, I couldn't hold my head up in Seattle if after trying to make this movie that was not about exploitation of the city at all, what could have been an exploitive TV show, I just was like, I'll never be able to hold my head up straight here. But, I got to say, Friends pretty skillfully, delivers comedic character comedy. And I don't know, it all could have worked out, but I'm happy with the way things worked out. I still haven't seen a full episode of Friends because the pain is so acute.
My God, it's got to kill you. Do you feel like Singles created the coffee kind of setting for movies and TV? Because I was trying to think, we talked about this when we did the rewatchables. Like, what did it before then? I couldn't come up with one.
Seattle did it. Did it. I mean, they had already, the coffee culture was in full swing. Nobody had really written about it.
Right.
That's why those guys, that was the easiest job to get if you're in one of those bands. It's like, that was the version of the diner that they had up in Seattle, partially because it was close to the companies that would later be, Pike Place, et cetera, Starbucks and everything. That was all coming. But these places were so cool because they were so uniquely Northwestern and the clientele was kind of rocking. So it'd be like a young community having these cool coffee drinks. And then there'd be other young people serving them. And it was like, this is cool. This is a great setting for the found family of Singles.
Friends ripped it off. Yeah, I was trying to think. When I was in college in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I used to go to a Dunkin' Donuts like 10 minutes away to go try to write notes for a column or handwrite half of a column. There was no place like that. I mean, I lived in Boston after. There was no place like that. So even just singing in Singles, I'm like, whoa, what's this?
I totally, same here. I was like, wait, this is the Denny's of Seattle? I'm in. This is the coolest.
All right. So casting Almost Famous, you and our friend Jim Miller did an awesome podcast. So I don't want to like rehash all of that. But one of the great things in that podcast, which is part of the Almost Famous culture, is just that Brad Pitt's going to be Russell Hammond. And Brad Pitt's going to be Russell Hammond. And Brad Pitt's going to be Russell Hammond. And he just can't quite get there. And then all of a sudden, Brad Pitt's not Russell Hammond.
Yeah.
And that's the star of your movie. And okay, now what? And I don't want to say you stumbled into Billy Crudup, but he came on this pod and he was just, I mean, obviously like loves that movie and people get mentioned it to him the most on anything. But like, I feel like you ended up with the right Russell Hammond, which is like another thing. Like with
Big
movies, you just never know. It's like this door closes, that door opens, and it's actually the better door, but you have no idea in the moment.
You have no idea in the moment, which makes it scary and exciting and all that stuff. One of the reasons that Billy Crudup is Russell Hammond is Steven Spielberg. He had started DreamWorks and he really loved, Jerry Maguire and wanted to like support my voice. And so I gave them, and Walter Parks was the producer and Laurie McDonald. They were working with me and I was like, okay, well, they want to support my voice. That's cool. I'm going to give them the voiciest thing I have, which is really what should have been my first movie. Kind of that Almost Famous is pretty much traditionally the first movie you'd make because it's about your family and growing up and everything. But because of Jerry Maguire and the support of Spielberg and those guys, they were like, do that movie in the best way you know how. And at one point when Brad Pitt fell out and Meryl Streep had talked to us about playing the Elaine Miller part. No, and it was the wrong way to go. It was too starry. And Spielberg, to his credit, I mean, there was like a sad day where it was like, what are we going to do? And he was like, he said, the script's the star. So let's get the best actors for the script and I'm going to make your movie. And so the math of it kind of, morphed into what ultimately became the right people. Sarah Polley spent about 4 months or so as Penny Lane. We worked on the part a lot. She's fantastic. The same woman that's directing these movies that people love. She was present as Sarah Polley playing Penny Lane. It was very brilliant and ultimately just chose a different career path and didn't want to do a Hollywood movie, even though I desperately was trying to say, I'm not a Hollywood guy. I'm really not. It's like, well, here we are in Hollywood. So she moved on. And Kate Hudson, who'd been extremely loyal and hung in to play the sister through all of these delays, rebuffing Harvey Weinstein business-wise. He kept trying to put her in a romantic comedy and pay her more money and say, why are you hanging out in this little part? I can do this for you. She said no and be loyal to the Cameron Rock movie. And so when Sarah Polley fell out, she kind of rose into this position of us saying, well, we got to try Kate out. And she was pure magic. She was magic. I have a little rehearsal tape where she just starts playing Penny Lane. And it's, again, Spielberg said, perfect. She's wonderful. She lights up the room. Make the movie.
We should mention you had some juice after Jerry Maguire. Let's be honest. Jerry Maguire was a massive movie. Yeah.
I mean, it was the juice.
Yeah. So this is, if there was ever a time to make Almost Famous, it was going to be after Jerry Maguire. This is like, plus at, 28 years, 27 years after you lived through it, you could still remember a lot of it. I think probably, although you have a great memory, it'd probably be a little bit harder to do it now. But I think one of the things, there's so many things I love about that movie, but how meticulous it is. Like even like just the way Williams' room is decorated and subtle shit like that, where you could just tell like you're just a maniac about it, right? Like every poster had to be perfect in the right spot. It had to, all the albums had to be exactly what the albums would be. And it just seems like you probably went nuts trying to figure out every single aspect of this, right?
Yeah, I had one of those freak out moments that they tell about directors, like that what would now be a YouTube moment. I had one of them. I think I've had two.
in your career?
In my career, I've had two. One was at the San Diego Sports Arena when we were doing the Stillwater concert, and we had a good amount of extras, and then kind of CGI'd more extras towards the back of the arena. But it was the same night. I mean, people were already seeing the mania of me trying to direct the movie coming, because I think I'd already gone through this period where I'm like, we gotta have this shot be the cover of the Neil Young album Time Fades Away. There's a guy with a rose here, and he's right up here, and it's got to be perfect. So they're already rolling their eyes. But then they're talking to the extras, and they're saying like, okay, and when the song's over, you applaud. And so they did it. And all these extras were doing like the heavy metal horns, Ronnie James Dio thing. And like, I love that, but that didn't happen until the 80s. So they're like, we're losing time. We're ready to go. Let's do it. And I'm like, no, the raw heavy metal rock horns are wrong. They're like, if they're looking at the rock horns, you're in trouble. And I'm like, I would be looking at the rock horns.
Yeah.
We have to change it. So that was one of those moments where they were like, oh, okay, he's that guy after all. But now I'm just forever. I see those scenes and I'm forever happy that you can look at that audience, and it's pretty literally a 70s audience, which is cool. And Almost Famous needed that.
The thing is, the way you did that movie, at some point you have to commit. You're all in the poker game, right? It's not like you can be like, all right, we'll cut corner on this. You just can't. You're all in. Everything has to be perfect.
You got to be all in.
1973, 74.
And dig it. Like into that scenario, you put Billy Crudup, who had only played piano in his life, and he has 6 weeks to play guitar and learn how to do it. And Peter Frampton was helping out as a creative consultant, which was really cool.
Yeah.
That was actually the biggest draw for Brad Pitt in the day. He was like,
Frampton?
Yeah, he was like, oh man, this will be great to have Frampton there to help me do all this stuff and to be with Frampton himself. Like, yeah. And Frampton was really great with Crudup. And he had this wonderful thing that Crudup might have told you about, where he said, okay, if you really want to be accurate as that guitarist, you have to pick a moment, whether you're playing the right thing or not, where you just look up like you're summoning it all from the heavens. And so there are moments in Almost Famous where you see Billy doing that. And that's totally Frampton saying like, do that. You'll sell it, you know? But Crudup did learn how to play, and he still plays, which is great.
Wow. Well, you had that, and then you had Jason Lee, which I got to say, I love Jason Lee in the 90s. He wouldn't have been my first thought for like a front man of an early mid 70s, but then he was like perfect. It was like, oh my God, how did I not see this?
He's
the
perfect.
Hair, the beard. He was like, had that skinny. All the lead singers back then had that kind of skinny, looked like they hadn't eaten in a couple weeks vibe to them.
Yes,
and he
like
just kind of had
waist and shirts that they tuck in and shit, you know. And so it's like, what he had was like the pure-hearted narcissism. Why can't we just look cool?
Right.
What's wrong with this? I love Jason Lee in it. And I love, you know, Drew Gehling in our play is so fantastic BB. And we put a lot more BB stuff in there because I just can't get enough.
Oh,
BB,
nice.
Yeah. We can stay in the timeline, brother. Don't want to throw you off.
No. I just had a Hoffman. You have Hoffman, what, for 2 days?
Yeah.
One of the great
days,
actors
like
of the last 30 years.
No kidding.
And he's sick.
Kidding.
And you have to do all the Lester Bangs scenes with him.
Yeah.
And he doesn't feel great. And it ends up, it's like, I don't know what my favorite Hoffman is, but it's in the conversation. It's like him and Scotty J and maybe 2 other ones, but his Lester Bangs is unbelievable. We're not cool.
And he had an instinct on it, you know, that was so smart. You know, the whole, his whole big speech, you're going to dig this. His whole big speech about we are the uncool and all that stuff. I wrote it. I don't know if you ever had that Todd Rundgren album, Something Anything, but there's a picture of Todd. I think it's inside Something Anything, where Todd has his hands out, like, you know, in victory. And he's like yelling to the world, you're on his back. And I thought like, oh man, this is what that Lester Bangs speech is. Like, it's like, because we are uncool. And I wrote it as a victory speech. So Hoffman on the day is looking at the scene and he says, does it have to be that kind of thing. It's like, no, I mean, it's written to be that, but like, what do you have in mind? And he goes, what if we're just the last two guys on earth who are awake and on the phone together? I'm like, thank you, Philip Seymour Hoffman. Let's go. And that's what he did, Bill.
Wow.
That's he freaking called that one. That was an audible. And he was like, yeah, let's do it like that. And John Toll lit it, and it's perfect. And, you know, we don't stray too far from that vibe in the play, but that's all Phil. And I didn't spend that much time with him. And I don't know if he left our set knowing if the movie would be good or not. I was never sure if he believed in it as much as I did. I believe he believed in what he did. But, you know, I was a guy playing music and, you know, playing music during actors' takes and things. And I don't know what he expected. But when I came to New York to have him loop some of his lines because of noise, he wanted to watch all his scenes. And I stood next to him watching his scenes in this little recording studio. And he turned to me and he said, so I'm in a play tonight, and it's with John C. Reilly, and it's called True West. And I'm going to leave a ticket for you. And I'd love for you to come and say hi to me after. I was like, sure, I'm here to loop you, man. I'll go see that play. I love True West. So I go see the play, and, you know, fantastic, right? And I go back to talk to him afterwards. And there was a whole crowd of people in the hallway. And you knew that Philip Seymour Hoffman's dressing room was at the end of this hall, but he hadn't opened the door yet. He opens the door, and he looks through all the people, and he points at me and crooks his finger. And everybody's looking at me like, why you? You know, so I walk through, and I go into the room. He shuts the door, and he goes, you made a fucking good movie, and I'm proud to be in it, and I know what that movie is going to be, and I really thank you for it. And if I was sick and, you know, quiet when I was doing it, I'm just really grateful to be a part of it. Thank you for making the movie. And then he called the rest of the people in, and he had to, you know, he saw his people. But
wow.
He really kind of sat with it and wanted to tell me that. And I talked to him a couple of times after that, but that was kind of the definitive time with Philip Seymour Hoffman, where he kind of ruminated on the whole experience and said, happy I'm in it.
Can we go 3 deep dive, really dorky, almost famous questions before we talk about the musical?
Let's do it.
So, the fact checker, the Rolling Stone, who's just really mean to William the whole time. I'm guessing that was based on a fact checker that was really mean to you in the 70s?
Oh, yes. Several of them. Yeah.
Okay.
They didn't care for me.
That was it? Just fact checkers in general did not like you. Was your process off? What was it about you that they didn't like?
The recordings I made and the places where I did interviews were not a place where you had like clean recordings. And some of it was just in my notes because, you know, I'll take my time with Jimmy Page wherever it happens. Sometimes it happens in a huge...
On cocktail napkins, right.
Anything, you know, so I would gather it from all these sources, and I think they felt like, you know, this is the work of a fan, which we now have to unravel a little bit. And, you know, it happened for a while where I think they liked a more traditional approach, but so they were always like eye rolling. So I decided to put like the eye rolling fact checker in there. But what's funny is now people come to see the play and they say, that's really funny that there were fact checkers. I'm like, yeah, I guess your blog doesn't have any fact checkers, and that's another way of doing it, you know.
So anyway, one of the great all right,
right.
So that's one.
Yeah,
one of the great deleted scenes of all time, which is on YouTube. It's William and I guess Zooey Deschanel's brother, who's amazing in this scene, and they're showing Frances McDormand's character, the mother, trying to explain to her why he loves music, and they play her Stairway to Heaven, and it's 9 minutes long.
Yes.
And it's not in the movie because Led Zeppelin wouldn't clear the song. Question 1.
Yeah.
Is it a good thing it's not in the movie? I feel like it probably is at this point, right?
Absolutely.
That's like a good miss. I think it would have thrown the movie off.
But the game changer on that was that we did screen it with the song in there before we officially got denied by Led Zeppelin, and it did stop the movie experience. I mean, that trippy little fun thing you can watch at home on YouTube didn't work in a big theater of people who were kind of like had already been sitting there for an hour. But you got to love Frances McDormand, who spent an enormous amount of time coming up with every possible facial expression to get her through a basically wordless reaction to Stairway to Heaven. With my mom co-acting with her, by the way. That's my mom, who looks like me in drag on the sofa. But yes, the Zooey Deschanel boyfriend character, the rejected boyfriend character, is probably my favorite in the scene.
He's unbelievable.
Or close.
What was his name? What's the actor's name?
Jesse
Right,
Caron.
So, in a weird way, it's great you filmed the scene because you don't know YouTube culture and deleted scene DVD culture is coming.
Yeah.
So then you have the DVD, but you're still not allowed to put the music on the DVD. So you have the whole scene. You're like, press play.
You got to do it yourself.
I have multiple DVDs. Yeah, it's like press the song, and you could. But now on YouTube they do it for you. But I think this worked out better. I'm so glad you did it
too. Yeah.
And now it's
thank you.
Now it's the way it is. All right, that was question number 2.
I love question 2.
Question number 3, you still get Led Zeppelin for the last song. You get Tangerine, which is one of the most incredible songs you could end a movie with, especially for that point of the thing. So how do you get Tangerine but not Stairway to Heaven?
Well, they were great. I think Robert Plant already felt like he had enough of Stairway to Heaven, or at least felt it was so overexposed that I remember him saying,
probably right.
It's become a wedding song. You don't want Stairway to Heaven. But they said, you get 4 songs, the other 4 songs you wanted. And Jimmy Page, here's how great they were when they saw the screening of Almost Famous alone in a little theater in England. Jimmy Page said, I would like the acoustic side of Led Zeppelin, represented a tiny bit more than the songs that are already on this list. Tangerine was on the list. And he said, I want to, I think it's North Country Woman. I can't have that wrong. He said, take this extra song for free and take that so that all of our stuff is represented. And that was amazing.
Jesus.
So he said that, I know, he said that over this little table in this little wine bar across the street from where we'd screen the movie for them on the one day a year where they had like a day together to do business decisions. And so he said that they were just old time buddies together. They were wonderful. And here's what they did after we did the little talk about what would go into Almost Famous. They geeked out about Jeff Buckley for about 45 minutes sitting there at the table about how much they both loved Jeff Buckley. And I remember thinking, this is so great because this is a movie about being a fan. And it kind of ends with Led Zeppelin at this little table fanning out about Jeff Buckley. It's like, whatever happens, I'm good. So when it kind of bombed in the theater, the movie still felt like it was what it was meant to be. And once again, my mom, such a strong voice, she was like, if you're happy with it, people will find it. Don't worry about it. And people did find it.
Same thing for The Who. You got Sparks. I mean, you had to call in some favors, I'm guessing, or like cash in on relationships that you had built when you covered these guys.
Yeah, and the people that came through always surprised me because some of them were really not real generous with giving their music. It's a little different era than now, where you can you won't get dinged too hard for taking a big chunk of money for giving it to like Cadillac or something. But
right,
Joni Mitchell will never be that person, and she gave us River, no questions asked, for the play too.
Yeah, there's not a lot of Joni Mitchell songs in movies, I'm going to guess.
But her stuff is so cinematic. When they do appear, people do
it matters.
Well. People do well. Coda will tell you that Joni Mitchell served them.
I mean, she made Coda. I mean, Coda was great, but that diving into Joni Mitchell.
Yeah.
Joni Mitchell, big resurgence for her because she performed
Big
live this
resurgence.
year. Big comeback.
Yeah.
So Almost Famous comes out and it's successful, but not that successful.
Yeah.
But then clearly was going to have this different kind of success that it pretty much
Hopefully.
achieved quickly. And then over the course of the 2000s, I think it's one of the most rewatchable movies of the last 25 years. It was on a lot and something started to shift, I would say, mid 2000s. Could you feel it?
Yes, I could feel it because at a certain point, I stopped hearing about Show Me the Money and it was all about Almost Famous.
Wow.
Yeah, that's still the case.
So it's 5 years of just people screaming, "Show me the money" at you, and
yes.
Tom Cruise goldfish meltdowns.
Yeah, replaced by people yelling, "Don't take drugs" at Francis McDormand on the street.
My God.
It was a baton pass moment.
Yeah, because I remember I wrote about it. And this is when you reached out to me. I wrote about it, I think in 2009. I grabbed all the quotes from the movie. I did this NBA awards thing. And the premise was, I think Almost Famous is the best movie of the 2000s. Come fight me, basically. And people went nuts. It was either they completely agreed. They're like, finally somebody said it.
Yeah.
Or they were like, fuck you. You know, but nobody could come up with a better movie. But I do feel like, we're 22 years later. Now it's a musical. Now you have a different pressure, right? Because people fucking love this movie. So now it's like, oh, you're going back to the well? You're making a musical out of it? All right.
So not
my
that
guard's
guy,
up,
too.
but you're not that guy.
Totally.
So make the case for the musical.
I never did a sequel and never went down that road at all. And that almost immediately after Fast Times, people wanted to do a Spicoli movie.
Oh,
and
God.
I didn't want to do that, I mean, you probably would have never gotten Sean, but you would have gotten somebody, and they would have been happy to do a Spicoli movie or, a series of them. But something about Almost Famous being kind of a musical already made me open to it. And a buddy of mine who knew theater, we spent some months. He was really great about kind of schooling me a little bit in theater. We worked on what would have been a jukebox version of Almost Famous. Lots of hits, like lots of Who hits and stuff like that. But at a certain point, the whole thing just kind of sagged like a balloon losing air because you don't want to see that.
Yeah.
You don't want to. And that wasn't the spirit of Almost Famous. So I just decided no. And thanked my buddy, and we just kind of moved on. And then another good friend of mine named Leah Volek, who was like the greatest music supervisor, helper person in movies. She's like, everybody would always say, like, you got to work with Leah Volek, man. She knows how to secure stuff and help you. She has such a great musical sense. Anyway, I met her. They were right. And she was a Broadway person and a theater person. So at a certain point, she came to me and said, like, I'm sorry to over-answer your question. She's like, I'm now in charge of Sony theatricals. So I have this cool side job that I'm working on now where I'm in charge of any movie from our catalog that's going to go, on a theater stage. Do you have any interest in Almost Famous? And I said, well, what kind of Almost Famous? And she said, just like a real play, like the story, something that captured the feeling you talk about the movie on the stage. So we just kind of tiptoed along for years, basically. And I met a director that I felt really got it. This guy named Jeremy Herron. Tom Kitt, who's a composer who I really felt got it. And just like one step at a time, we worked on it. And then there was an opportunity to do an off-Broadway version of it in San Diego, which I, terrifying myself, said, yes, let's do it at the Old Globe
That's
Theater.
A home game for you.
Yeah, but like a terrifying home game because I very quickly was the guy. I was like, oh, great. If this doesn't work, I did it in my hometown. This is not cool, But my mom, who was a huge supporter of the idea and was, big Broadway and theater fan that was always trying to like bring it into our family when I was really young, she would say, don't give up, don't give up, don't give up. And when she died 2 days before the first audience came in to see the play, it was like, oh shit, now the stakes are as high as they'll ever be. What's going to happen? And what happened was the kind of, whatever it was, the kind of feeling in the air that we already had, combined with the enhanced emotion of what had just happened with one of our lead characters. And the cast was all, we all had lived together and we all were in on things. So it was like a band. We were in our own little submarine, and they were kind of like, fuck it, man. We're going to do the best version of this play ever for Lester Bangs and Alice Crowe. And people showed up every night, got standing ovations, and we shocked ourselves and thought, okay, well, we should go to Broadway with it. Why not? I mean, come on. And then the pandemic hit, and the cast stayed together throughout the whole of COVID.
Jesus.
Didn't take other jobs. We were always in our, they had like, email chains and chat rooms. They were like, they stayed together. We had weekly get-togethers, and the weirdest thing happened. They stayed loyal in a way that people are often encouraged not to, because, there were agents and managers on their side that were saying, get a TV pilot, man. Like, you won't make that much money in theater if it doesn't go to Broadway or whatever. It's like, why are you so loyal to these parts? And it was because we had that time together as music fans, et cetera, et cetera. So then it became something that a quest. And so here we are for all the right reasons. And people feel it in the theater. And we'll see what happens. But I know that it is true to the very thing that the movie is about. Loving music and, my idiosyncratic family.
Well, I didn't know the pandemic thing. That's an unbelievable story. So
I'm there every night, Bill. Like, I really love talking to the fans, and a lot of them are exactly as you say. Like, I was scared. I was scared to come here. I drove from Boston, and I said to my girlfriend, this is a roll of the dice. But they dig it. So I'm happy to share the pleasant surprise with them. I'm just like them.
November 3rd, Bernard B. Jacobs Theater. Almost Famous, the musical, is the website if you want to, .com, if you want to go check that out. I forgot to mention, my craziest psychotic thing you did was writing the entire Stillwater Rolling Stone piece that they read. That's on their website. You can read it, and it's really good. And it really reads like it was in a feature in 1973. I love, how long did you spend writing that and creating it? It's amazing.
I gotta say, it is amazing. I gotta say, it's a joint journalistic effort. It's Rob Sheffield, David Brown, Christian Horde.
Oh, it's a group effort.
Angie Morticchio.
It's so funny that it exists. You can go look it up right now.
Yeah, and they gave it to me, and I made a few little changes and added some stuff, but it's like group journalism, which I don't know. It seems like that should have been a train wreck, but actually we kind of project some of it behind, and I love it. I love it because the lead. I just love the lead. I'm flying high over Tupelo, Mississippi with America's hottest band, and we're all about to die. It's a great lead.
But it also, it dives in, there's quotes, and it just feels like every Rolling Stone piece for 12 years. It's like it hits all the beats, it moves. I thought it was really good. All right, I'm going to see the play, I promise.
Cool, come.
I'm glad we did this. Thanks for all the time. Congratulations on it. And anytime you want to come on, just tell me.
Thanks, man. I really enjoyed it.